The diamond glittered under the restaurant's soft lighting, catching the nervous tremor in my hand. Yes, I whispered, tears already welling up. Mark grinned, his blue eyes sparkling with a joy that mirrored my own. He slid the ring onto my finger, and for a moment, the world felt perfect. We were 27 in love and ready to build a life together. Mark's mother, Patricia, was enthusiastic. From the moment she met me, she'd been planning our wedding, our house, and, of course, our future grandchildren. Honestly, it was a little overwhelming, but I figured it came from a good place. She loved Mark fiercely and wanted him to be happy. The wedding was beautiful. A classic affair, exactly what Patricia had envisioned. I wore a traditional white dress, which, by the way, she practically picked out herself, and Mark looked devastatingly handsome in his tux. We danced, we laughed, and we celebrated with our friends and family. Life felt like a fairy tale. The happily ever after, however, started to unravel sooner than I ever imagined. We'd only been married for about 6 months when the baby fever started. Not mine, specifically. Patricia's! When are you two going to give me some grandbabies? She'd ask at every family gathering, poking my stomach with a playful but pointed finger. Mark and I weren't opposed to having kids, but we wanted to enjoy being married for a little while first. We talked about waiting a year or two, focusing on our careers and saving some money. But Patricia wasn't patient. She'd drop not-so-subtle hints constantly. One time, she gifted us a book titled The Miracle of Motherhood with certain passages highlighted. Another time, she'd started buying baby clothes on sale, just in case. It was suffocating. Then, one Tuesday morning, a few weeks after our first anniversary, I woke up feeling different. Nauseous. My breasts were tender. I brushed it off as a bug, but the feeling persisted for days. I bought a pregnancy test on my lunch break, hiding it in my purse like I was smuggling contraband. I went home, locked myself in the bathroom, and peed on the stick. 2 pink lines. Pregnant. I stared at the test, my heart hammering in my chest. Part of me was terrified, part of me was ecstatic. I was going to be a mother. I rushed out to find Mark, practically bursting with the news. He was working in the garage, tinkering with his vintage motorcycle. "Mark!" I yelled, my voice trembling. "I have something to tell you." He wiped his hands on a rag and turned to me, a confused look on his face. I held up the pregnancy test. His eyes widened. A slow smile spread across his face. He whooped and spun me around. "We're going to have a baby," he shouted, his voice filled with pure joy. We hugged, laughed, and cried together. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. We decided to tell our families that weekend, at Patricia's Sunday dinner. I was nervous, but Mark squeezed my hand reassuringly. The announcement went exactly as expected. My parents were thrilled. They'd always wanted grandkids, and they showered us with congratulations. Patricia, on the other hand, was over the moon. She practically shrieked with delight, hugging me so tightly I thought I might suffocate. "I knew it! I just knew it!" she exclaimed, tears streaming down her face. She started planning the baby shower before dessert was even served. Everything seemed perfect. For a little while, the first few months of my pregnancy were relatively uneventful. Morning sickness was manageable, and I was mostly just tired. Mark was incredibly supportive, catering to my cravings, rubbing my back, and reading aloud to the baby. Patricia, however, was a constant presence. She called every day, sometimes multiple times a day, to check on me. She offered unsolicited advice on everything from prenatal vitamins to baby names. She even started rearranging our living room to prepare for the baby's arrival, despite the fact that the nursery was nowhere near ready. I tried to be patient, to understand that she was just excited, but her constant interference was starting to wear me down. I felt like I had no control over my own pregnancy. Then, one evening, about 4 months into my pregnancy, Mark came home from work with a strange look on his face. He was quiet and withdrawn, barely acknowledging me as he walked through the door. "What's wrong?" I asked, concern knotting in my stomach. He hesitated for a moment, then pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. He handed it to me. It was a fertility test result. Mark's fertility test result. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "My mom gave it to me," he said, his voice tight. She said I should get tested a while ago, just to be sure. Before we started trying, I looked at the paper again. The results were stark. Abnormal sperm count, low motility, possible infertility. My world tilted. "Mark," I said, my voice trembling, "this can't be right. How is this possible?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at the floor, his face a mask of confusion and disbelief. "Who else knew about this?" I asked, my voice rising. "Just my mom," he mumbled. "She said she wanted to protect me, to make sure I was prepared." The implications of what she had done slammed into me like a tidal wave. She had known about this, if it was even real, and kept it from both of us. And now she was using it to what? "Mark," I said, my voice pleading, "you have to believe me. This baby is yours. There's no question about it." He finally looked up at me, his eyes filled with pain and doubt. I don't know what to believe," he said, his voice cracking. That was the moment everything started to fall apart. The next few days were a living hell. Mark became distant and cold. He barely spoke to me, and when he did, his words were laced with suspicion. He started sleeping in the guest room. He stopped touching me. He stopped looking at me the way he used to. I tried to reason with him, to convince him that I would never betray him, but he wouldn't listen. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing rapidly. Patricia, of course, was a constant presence, hovering in the background, offering her support and advice. She made pointed comments about the importance of knowing the truth and the dangers of being naive. One afternoon, she came over while Mark was at work. I was sitting on the couch, trying to distract myself with a book, when she walked in unannounced. "We need to talk," she said, her voice sharp and accusatory. I sighed and closed my book. "About what, Patricia?" "About this situation," she said, gesturing towards my stomach. "It's clear that this baby isn't Mark's." The first stood up, my hands shaking. "How dare you?" I spat. "How dare you come into my home and say something like that?" "I'm just being realistic," she said, her voice cold. "Mark can't have children. It's a medical fact. That test could be wrong," I cried. "And even if it's not, that doesn't mean I cheated on him." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Don't insult my intelligence. You were probably seeing someone else behind his back." "That's a lie," I screamed. "I would never do that to Mark." "Then explain the baby," she said. Her eyes narrowed. I couldn't explain the unexplainable. I just stood there, tears streaming down my face, feeling utterly helpless. "I think it's best if you leave," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "For Mark's sake. He doesn't need this kind of stress in his life." "Leave?" I echoed, my voice hollow. "You want me to leave?" "Yes," she said firmly. "I think it's the only solution." And just like that, she kicked me out. I packed a bag, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold on to anything. I threw in some clothes, a few toiletries, and the ultrasound pictures of my baby. Those pictures were the only tangible proof I had that this was all real, that I wasn't losing my mind. Mark wasn't home when I left. I didn't leave a note. What was there to say? He had already made his choice. He had chosen to believe his mother over me. I didn't know where to go. My parents lived in another state, and I didn't want to burden them with my problems. My friends were all busy with their own lives. I felt completely alone. I ended up driving to a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The room was dingy and smelled of stale cigarettes, but it was a roof over my head. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, tears streaming down my face. I was pregnant, homeless, and heartbroken. My husband thought I had cheated on him, and his mother was the one who had orchestrated it all. How had my life fallen apart so quickly? The next few weeks were a blur of despair and uncertainty. I spent most of my time in the motel room, crying, sleeping, and trying to figure out what to do. I called Mark several times, but he never answered. I left voicemails begging him to talk to me, to listen to me, but he ignored them all. I knew I had to find a way to support myself and my baby, but I was 7 months pregnant and emotionally shattered. Finding a job seemed impossible. I considered going on welfare, but the thought of relying on government assistance made me feel ashamed. I had always been independent, self-sufficient. Now I was a charity case. One day, I decided to visit my doctor. I needed to make sure the baby was okay, and I needed someone to talk to. Doctor? Ramirez was a kind and compassionate woman. She listened patiently as I poured out my heart, telling her everything that had happened. When I finished, she took my hand and squeezed it gently. "You're going through a lot, honey," she said, her voice soft. "But you're not alone. There are resources available to help you." She gave me a list of organizations that provided assistance to pregnant women and new mothers. She also offered to connect me with a therapist who specialized in postpartum depression and relationship issues. I left her office feeling a little bit lighter. At least I knew I wasn't completely alone. I started attending therapy sessions, and it helped to have someone to talk to who wasn't emotionally invested in the situation. My therapist helped me to process my anger, my grief, and my fear. She also helped me to see that I deserved better than what Mark and Patricia had put me through. I started looking for a job, and after several rejections, I finally found one as a receptionist at a small law firm. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to cover the motel rent and buy some basic necessities. Life was still hard, but I was starting to find my footing. I was starting to rebuild my life, one small step at a time. A few weeks before my due date, I received a letter in the mail. It was postmarked from Mark's hometown. My heart pounded as I tore open the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. It was from Mark's Aunt Carol, Patricia's sister. I unfolded the letter and began to read. "Dear, my name. I know this letter will come as a shock, but I can't keep silent any longer. I have to tell you the truth about Patricia and the fertility test. The test results Mark showed you were fake. Patricia fabricated them. She paid someone at the lab to alter the results. I know this because I overheard her talking about it on the phone. She was bragging to a friend about how she had gotten rid of you and protected her son from being burdened with a child that wasn't his. I know this is a terrible thing to admit, but I can't stand by and watch you suffer any longer. You deserve to know the truth. Patricia has always been manipulative and controlling. She has always put Mark on a pedestal and done everything in her power to protect him, even if it meant hurting other people. I hope you can forgive me for not speaking up sooner. I was afraid of Patricia, but I can't live with the guilt any longer. Please, believe me. This is the truth. Sincerely, Carol the First stared at the letter, my hands shaking uncontrollably. It was all true. Patricia had faked the fertility test. She had deliberately set out to destroy my marriage and tear me away from Mark. The rage that coursed through me was unlike anything I had ever felt before. I wanted to scream, to shout, to break things, but I couldn't. I had to stay calm. I had to think. I called Aunt Carol immediately. She answered on the third ring. "Carol?" I said, my voice trembling. "Is this really you? Did you really write that letter?" "Yes, it's me," she said, her voice filled with remorse. "I'm so sorry, my name. I should have told you sooner." I asked her to tell me everything, to recount the conversation she had overheard. She did, and her story matched the details in the letter perfectly. By the time I hung up the phone, I was convinced. Patricia was guilty. She had manipulated and deceived us both. I knew I had to confront Mark. He deserved to know the truth. I drove to Mark's house. It felt strange to be back there, in the place where we had once been so happy. I rang the doorbell, and Mark answered the door. He looked surprised to see me. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice cold. I need to talk to you, I said, my voice firm. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let me in. The house was exactly as I had left it, except it felt colder, emptier. Patricia wasn't there. I was grateful for that. I didn't think I could face her without losing control. What do you want? Mark asked, his arms crossed. I took a deep breath and pulled out the letter from my purse. I handed it to him. Read this, I said. He looked at the letter, his brow furrowed. He started to read, his eyes widening as he took in the words. When he finished, he looked up at me, his face pale. Is this true? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, I said. It's true! Patricia faked the fertility test. She lied to you. She lied to both of us. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes filled with disbelief and confusion. I don't understand, he stammered. Why would she do that? Because she's a controlling, manipulative woman who thinks she knows what's best for you, I said, my voice trembling with anger. She wanted to get rid of me because she didn't think I was good enough for you. She didn't want you to have a child that wasn't perfect in her eyes. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. I can't believe this, he mumbled. I can't believe I was so stupid. I should have trusted you. I should have known that she was lying. It's not your fault, I said, my voice softening. She's very good at what she does. She's been manipulating you your whole life. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry for everything. I was a fool. Please, can you ever forgive me? I looked at him, my heart aching. I could see the pain and remorse in his eyes. I knew he was genuinely sorry, but I also knew that I couldn't go back. The trust was broken. The damage was done. I don't know, Mark, I said, my voice quiet. I need time to think. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through my abdomen. I gasped and clutched my stomach. What's wrong? Mark asked, his eyes filled with concern. I think I'm in labor, I said, my voice barely a whisper. His eyes widened in panic. He jumped up and helped me to my feet. We need to get you to the hospital, he said, his voice urgent. He drove me to the hospital as fast as he could. The contractions were coming fast and furious. By the time we arrived, I was in excruciating pain. The nurses rushed me into a delivery room. Mark stayed by my side throughout the entire labor. He held my hand, wiped my brow, and whispered words of encouragement. After hours of pushing, our baby was finally born. A beautiful baby girl with dark hair and bright blue eyes. As I held her in my arms, I felt a love so profound it took my breath away. She was perfect. Mark stood beside me, tears streaming down his face. He reached out and gently touched her tiny hand. She's beautiful, he whispered. Yes, I said, my voice choked with emotion. She is. In that moment, I knew that everything had changed. I was a mother now. My priority was my daughter. The birth of our daughter changed everything. It forced me to confront the reality of my situation and make some difficult decisions. Mark wanted to get back together. He wanted us to be a family. He promised he would never let his mother interfere in our lives again. He was a changed man. He was more attentive, more compassionate, more understanding. He was everything I had ever wanted in a husband. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't go back to the way things were. The trust was gone. The wounds were too deep. I knew that if I stayed with Mark, I would always be looking over my shoulder, wondering when Patricia would strike again. I couldn't live like that. I needed to protect myself and my daughter. I needed to create a life that was free from manipulation and control. So, I made the hardest decision of my life. I filed for divorce. Mark was devastated. He begged me to reconsider, but I stood my ground. I knew it was the right thing to do. The divorce was finalized a few months later. It was a painful and difficult process, but I got through it. I moved into a small apartment with my daughter. I continued to work at the law firm, and I enrolled in online classes to finish my degree. Life was still challenging, but I was happy. I was free. I was in control of my own destiny. Mark remained a part of our daughter's life. He was a loving and supportive father. We even managed to develop a civil and respectful co-parenting relationship. Patricia, however, was a different story. She never apologized for what she had done. She never admitted that she was wrong. She tried to see her granddaughter, but I refused to let her. I didn't want her toxic influence in my daughter's life. Eventually, Mark cut ties with her as well. He realized that she was never going to change, and he couldn't allow her to hurt us anymore. Years passed. My daughter grew into a smart, beautiful, and independent young woman. I finished my degree and started my own business. I even found love again, a kind and supportive man who loved me and my daughter unconditionally. Looking back, I can see that what happened with Mark and Patricia was a painful, but ultimately transformative experience. It taught me the importance of self-respect, independence, and the power of forgiveness. It also taught me that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that lead to the greatest happiness. Patricia never understood the damage she caused. She lived out her days bitter and alone, convinced that she was right all along, but I didn't let her define me. I didn't let her control my life. I rose above her manipulation and created a life filled with love, joy, and purpose. And that, in the end, is the greatest revenge of all.